There was once a nomadic people who rose from the open steppe and became the greatest fear of their age. They were known for war, for discipline, and for a brutality that shook kingdoms across Eurasia. From the grasslands of Central Asia, they pushed outward without pause, reaching Russia, Persia, India, and lands far beyond what their enemies believed possible. They destroyed cities, broke empires, and imposed new laws on the ruins of the old world. Under their rule, trade routes were redrawn, and the Silk Road became the most important network on Earth, connecting East and West as never before. And yet, the civilization that once ruled so much of humanity did not endure. The empire that reshaped the world faded, fractured, and ultimately disappeared. How did a people powerful enough to conquer continents lose their own civilization? And what remains today of an empire that once seemed unstoppable? This is the story of the Mongols. The shadow from the steppes. In the vast silence of the Eurasian steppe, where the horizon seems to breathe and the wind itself speaks in whispers of eternity, a storm was gathering. There were no marble palaces here, no gilded thrones, no written chronicles to mark its coming, only grass, sky, and the heartbeat of horses. For centuries, the nomads of this endless sea of land had lived and vanished like the seasons, their lives written in hoofprints that the next wind erased. But from this emptiness, from this wilderness that the empires of China and Persia dismissed as barbarian waste, would rise a force that would redraw the map of the world. The story begins with a boy named Temüjin, born around the year 1162, clutching a clot of blood in his fist. A sign, the shaman said, that he was destined to rule men. He came into a world of hunger and betrayal. His father, Yasuge, poisoned by rivals. His family, cast out by their clan. His mother, Hoelun, gathering wild roots to feed her children as wolves circled the campfires. In that crucible of exile, Temüjin learned the first law of the steppe, that mercy was weakness and unity was survival. The land around him was vast but merciless. It was a world without permanence, where loyalty was as fleeting as smoke, and every dawn might bring a raid, a death, a fire on the horizon. Yet in the eyes of this outcast boy burned a vision greater than any chieftain's ambition. He hunted not just for food, but for allegiance, gathering friends among the broken, the orphaned, the betrayed. Among them was Jamuka, his blood brother and destined rival, whose friendship would ignite and then consume an empire. Temüjin spoke of a world where men were bound not by clan or birth, but by loyalty. As he grew, he learned to read the land as others read scripture. He could sense the weather by the taste of the wind, track enemies across the open plains, strike like lightning, then vanish like mist. Yet every victory was earned with pain. Captured by the Temüjin, he was chained and paraded as a slave, his neck clamped in a wooden yoke. One night, under a sky thick with stars, he escaped, wading through rivers of ice, guided only by the North Star and the will to live. From that night, Temüjin was reborn. He understood that unity required both terror and faith. He offered his warriors protection in return for loyalty, plunder in return for obedience, and death for betrayal. Those who defied him were crushed. Those who joined him were rewarded, no matter their birth. Slowly, the tribes that had once mocked his dream began to kneel before him. A new banner rose on the wind, black as night, adorned with 9 white horse tails. Under that standard, the clans of the steppe became one people, the Mongols. When the shamans gathered to proclaim his title, they called him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The plains echoed with the sound of thousands of hooves, drums beating like thunder, voices chanting his name until it merged with the wind. It was not just a coronation, it was a declaration of destiny. A man who had been born in poverty, betrayed by his kin, hunted by his enemies, now stood poised to conquer the known world. But beneath the triumph, there was still the silence of the steppe, that endless emptiness that shaped every Mongol soul. In that silence, Genghis Khan looked out over the horizon and saw more than land. He saw the weakness of kingdoms divided by pride, cities rotting behind walls, rulers fattened on decadence and fear. To him, the world was already conquered. It simply did not yet know it. The empire that would soon stretch from the Pacific to the Danube began not with a sword, but with a dream whispered to the wind, that the earth itself could be ruled by the strength of one will. Forged in blood and brotherhood. The unification of the Mongol tribes was not a single battle, but a storm that rolled across the steppe for years, a storm of vengeance, alliances, and endless blood. Temüjin's dream demanded more than strength. It demanded that men renounce the feuds that had defined them for generations. One by one, the tribes that had once called him enemy were brought beneath his banner, some through persuasion, others through fire. When a clan resisted, their leaders were executed, their followers absorbed into his ranks. When they submitted, they were embraced as brothers. It was both mercy and terror, an empire born from paradox. Among those who fought beside him was Jamuka, the brother of his youth, now turned rival. Together they had sworn to share the world. But ambition is a flame that consumes friendship faster than it warms it. When Jamuka declared himself Gur Khan, universal ruler, the steppe once again divided. The two brothers of oath became brothers of war. Battles raged across the plains like wildfire. Horses screamed, arrows darkened the sun, and the rivers ran red with the blood of men who had once feasted together. In the end, Temüjin's discipline triumphed over Jamuka's pride. Captured and brought before his old friend, Jamuka refused mercy. "Let my bones rest in peace," he said, "for a friend who breaks oaths deserves no forgiveness." Temüjin ordered his death, not by blood, but by the breaking of his back. A death without spilled blood, preserving his enemy's honor even in execution. The tribes bowed, the clans swore. For the first time, the steppe had one law, one master, and one destiny. The Yasa, Genghis Khan's code, was proclaimed. A law that forbade theft, protected women, punished betrayal, and rewarded loyalty. It was brutal, but it brought order to a land that had known only chaos. Under its iron rule, the Mongols became not a swarm of raiders, but a nation of soldiers. They trained as if born to war, each man a horseman, archer, and warrior from childhood. They could ride for days without stopping, drinking horse blood for nourishment, sleeping in the saddle, fighting as one living storm. When the first great council of the Mongols assembled on the Onon River, the Khan addressed his people. "The sky has one sun," he said. "The earth shall have one master." And from that moment, his gaze turned outward. His messengers rode to the borders of the known world, to the kingdoms of the Jin in northern China, to the cities of the Khwarezmian Empire beyond the deserts. to the distant lands of Persia and Russia, demanding submission to the great Khan. Most laughed. The world had never seen an empire from the steppe that lasted longer than a generation. They mistook silence for weakness. But in that silence, Genghis Khan was sharpening his blade. The storm breaks. The first blow fell on the Jin dynasty of northern China. Against walls that rose like mountains and armies that outnumbered his 10 to 1, Genghis Khan unleashed the fury of the steppes. His armies moved like water, flowing around fortresses, cutting supply lines, burning granaries, then vanishing into the plains. The Chinese called them demons. They struck at night, with flaming arrows and thunderous siege engines captured and improved from their enemies. No fortress was too high, no city too rich. In 1215, the Mongols besieged Zhongdu, modern Beijing. For months, the city burned. The Jin emperor fled south, and the capital fell in ash and screams. Across the Gobi and into Central Asia, Genghis Khan's riders met the empire of Khwarezm, a vast realm of merchants and cities along the Silk Road. At first, he came in peace, seeking trade. His envoys carried silks, horses, and friendship. But the Shah, proud and suspicious, murdered them. When their severed heads were returned to Genghis Khan, the world shifted. "You have chosen war," he said, "and war you shall have." What followed was annihilation. From Otrar to Samarkand, from Bukhara to Nishapur, city after city was leveled. Witnesses said the earth shook with the hooves of horses and the rivers ran black with ash. Yet even amid the slaughter, the Khan spared artisans, engineers, scholars, those who could build as well as destroy. For he understood that conquest meant nothing without order. His army was a masterpiece of design. 10,000 horsemen divided into precise units, each answerable not to kin, but to commanders. He used intelligence and deception like a blade, spreading false rumors, feigning retreats, surrounding cities with fire. Against such cunning, the mightiest kingdoms crumbled. From the Caspian Sea to the Yellow River, the world trembled beneath the hooves of the Mongols. Yet in the Khan's eyes, it was not destruction he saw, but purification. The cleansing of weakness, the forging of order in the fire of chaos. Pax Mongolica. From the ashes of conquest rose something unexpected: peace. The world that had once been divided by walls and borders now found itself connected by roads and riders. The Yam, the Mongol postal network, stretched across continents. Merchants traveled from Venice to Beijing without fear. Thieves and warlords vanished. Law ruled where chaos had once reigned. Under Mongol protection, the Silk Road became a living artery of civilization, carrying silk and spices, but also knowledge, art, and ideas. For the first time in centuries, East and West spoke to each other again. In the heart of Karakoram, the Khan's new capital, ambassadors from Persia, China, and Europe knelt before the same throne. Muslim scholars debated Buddhist monks. Chinese astronomers taught Persian engineers. Genghis Khan, though illiterate, demanded the best minds of every conquered nation to serve him. He abolished torture, forbade the kidnapping of women, and granted religious freedom across his empire. All faiths, he said, worship the same eternal sky. The world called him barbarian. Yet beneath his rule, civilization itself found new breath. Even death could not stop the empire's march. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his body buried in secret beneath the steppe, his sons and grandsons carried his dream across the world. They burned through Russia, Persia, and the Middle East. They rode to the gates of Vienna, their arrows darkening the sky. To Europe, they were a plague. To the Silk Road, they were its guardians. Under his descendants, Ögedei, Monk, Kublai, the Mongol world became not a wound, but a bridge. Kublai and the Empire of the World. In the east, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons dreamed even greater dreams. Kublai Khan, born to rule, sought not merely conquest, but civilization itself. He built a city that would dazzle the world, Khanbalik, now Beijing. Its streets planned by Persian architects, its palaces glimmering with Chinese artistry. He embraced the wisdom of the conquered, not as a master, but as a student. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire became the Yuan Dynasty, the first foreign dynasty to rule all of China. Marco Polo, arriving from Venice, called it the most magnificent court on earth, a place where silk, gold, and ideas flowed like rivers. But power is a flame that burns even its keeper. The empire had grown too vast. The same roads that carried trade also carried rebellion. From Persia to Korea, from Burma to Hungary, the once united empire began to fracture. Kublai's rule brought splendor, but also strain. The old nomadic heart of the Mongols, forged in wind and grass, now sat beneath marble ceilings. The horsemen of the steppe had become emperors of cities. The world they had conquered was conquering them in return. The empire divides. After Kublai's death, the empire splintered into 4 great khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Each ruled in the name of Genghis, but each drifted further from his vision. The Mongol unity that had once terrified the world dissolved into rivalry and pride. Yet even in division, their influence endured. In Persia, Mongol rulers converted to Islam and rebuilt cities in marble and mosaic. In China, their dynasty left behind canals, trade routes, and an administrative system that would last centuries. In Russia, the Mongol yoke reshaped the Slavic world. The age of the horseman was fading. Gunpowder and ships would soon rule the world. The empire of the saddle gave way to the empires of the sea. But the Mongols had changed everything. The scale of war, the speed of communication, the meaning of empire. Legacy of the Eternal Sky. Centuries have passed since the hoofbeats faded from the steppe, but the echo remains. The postal routes of the Mongols became the trade routes of empires. Their laws shaped kingdoms from Moscow to Beijing. Even the genes of the Khan himself, carried by his countless descendants, flow in millions across Eurasia. Yet, their true legacy is not in blood or battle, but in connection. They linked the world for the first time since Rome, and in that connection, they birthed the modern age. Genghis Khan began as a fugitive and ended as a myth. To some, he was a monster, to others, a visionary. The truth lies somewhere between, a man who tore down the old world to build a new one, who united tribes through fear, yet ruled through order, who burned cities but opened roads. The paradox of the Mongol Empire is the paradox of civilization itself, that from destruction can come rebirth, and from chaos, order. When the winds howl across the steppes today, they still carry whispers of his name. The grass bends, the horses run, and the sky, that eternal blue sky the Mongols called Tengri, watches in silence. For under that sky, once, a man dared to believe that all the world could be one. And in some way, even now, it is. They were not born behind stone walls. No cities, no granaries, no borders. Only wind, horses, and a steppe with no end. A nomadic tribe that lived by movement could not survive by standing still. To live, they had to expand. Genghis Khan did not conquer land first. He conquered people. No more tribes, no more bloodlines, only law and loyalty. His cavalry moved faster than rumors. His arrows flew farther than sight. Fear arrived before the army did. Many cities surrendered before a single spear was seen. For the first time in history, Asia and Europe were no longer distant worlds. The Silk Road became safer. Merchants traveled farther than ever before. Ideas, technology, and knowledge moved with the hooves of horses. The empire did not expand by the sword alone, but by connection. But an empire born from war does not easily survive peace. The territory was too vast, the cultures too different, and power was no longer held by one hand. After Genghis Khan came division, succession struggles, autonomous khanates. They learned how to rule from the civilizations they once conquered. And in time, they were absorbed by those same civilizations. The world opened, but death traveled with it. Plagues followed trade routes, populations collapsed, old orders disappeared. No one truly won, no one truly lost. Only the world was never the same again. The Mongol Empire is gone. No eternal cities, no immortal palaces. But what remains is a connected world. From a silent steppe to a global map. They came, they conquered, and they vanished. But their footprints remain in the history of humankind.